On June 19, 1911, a new government presided over Portugal. They had taken over from the monarchy which preceded them, and they hoped that moving toward a system of elected leaders would solve so many of the problems that plagued the nation. Instead, this would be one of the most unstable times in the country's history, filled with attempted and successful coups, persecution of the religious, and constant conflict. But it was in this time a man saw opportunity for those who were willing to do what others couldn't, blocked by either morals or ability, but he would be the exception. As political turmoil was enveloping the country, the economy was quick to follow, stuck in a continuous decline, leaving its gold reserves as the lowest in Europe. The Bank of Portugal, which was partly a government entity and partly in private ownership, issued far more notes than were permitted, causing its currency to plummet in relation to the pound sterling. And it was also during this devastating period in the nation's history that one of the largest scams to ever be perpetrated would occur. And there's likely no other point in Portugal's history that it could have happened. The banknote scandal would end up consisting of 1 to 5% of the entire country's GDP. As Lord Macmillan of Aberfeldy put it, it was a crime for which, in the ingenuity and audacity of its conception, it would be difficult to find a parallel. This nearly perfect crime, as well as the subsequent attempted takeover of the Central Bank of Portugal, was the product of one man, and the way he committed it and was caught was simply incredible. This is learn something new. Arthur Alves was born in September of 1896 in Lisbon. After a fairly normal childhood, Alves found himself to be extremely interested in his practical engineering courses. However, his path would start to become dark very quickly, as he forged his own diploma from a non-existent school, saying that he was qualified in all of these areas of expertise. Armed with these phony qualifications, he felt confident that he would be able to get any job he desired, moving with his wife to the Portuguese colony of Angola in 1916. His forged degree earned him a government job there, as well as a job as a senior engineer in a railway maintenance workshop. Even though his diploma was fake, his aptitude for engineering was not. By the time he was 22, he was already chief engineer at the workshop. But it was at the height of this career, in this highly coveted position, that he quit, instead venturing into the shady business of buying broken machines and repairing them just enough to sell them to unsuspecting buyers as brand new. These profits were great, and he used them to take control of a mining company nearby. But this would turn out to be a disastrous investment for him, causing him to lose his money nearly immediately. To resolve his financial woes, Alves took a job at a railway company, using their checks and their money to cover all his personal expenses and debts. But his skills weren't honed yet, and he was soon discovered, being imprisoned in 1924 on charges of embezzlement at the age of 28. It was here in prison that he would hatch the plan of a lifetime. Alves used the 2 months that he spent behind bars studying the monetary operations of the Bank of Portugal. Portugal's central bank was a privately owned institution which worked with the government and had a monopoly over the issuance of the escudo paper currency. In 1891, they had moved away from the gold standard. Since the currency was no longer convertible to Portugal's gold reserves, the bank was free to issue notes that exceeded its capital. This meant that if every single note was to be exchanged with the bank for its value, the bank did not have enough money in its reserve to fulfill its obligations. But that is not at all uncommon in fiat currency standard, and almost all central banks today issue currency which far exceeds the country's reserves. Alves discovered that the bank also did not have a very efficient means of controlling the serial numbers of the notes. And because of this, there were often notes with duplicate serial numbers in circulation. He calculated the amount of total currency in circulation and derived the limit to which counterfeit currency could be injected into the economy without causing inflation, and as a result, tripping any alarms. Once out on bail, he set out to execute his plan. Alves had 3 accomplices: Jose Bandeira, Gustav Hennes, and Karel Meringue. These 3 figures were crucial to get access to the printers. The idea was to convince an authorized printer of Portuguese currency to print a special batch of notes at Alves' request. and instead of sending them to the Bank of Portugal as usual, they should deliver them to Reis and his crew. This way, the notes would be indistinguishable from the authentic bank-approved notes, as they would be printed using the same printer and same plates as the originals. But why would the printers agree to this? Well, Reis had spun up a story that he represented a syndicate of financiers who were secretly working with the Bank of Portugal in order to print notes to save the struggling economy of Angola. Reis forged a contract and a letter from the governor of the Bank of Portugal, which authorized the creation of a special batch of notes for this specific purpose. José Bandeira obtained a letter of introduction for Meringue from his elder brother Antonio Bandeira, who was the Portuguese minister to Hague. Meringue then went to London with this letter and convinced an authorized Bank of Portugal security printer that because this was a confidential project, he was to be the only intermediary between the printer and the bank. The printer wanted to send a letter to the governor of the Bank of Portugal for confirmation, but the group managed to intercept it and forge a confirmation instead. In February of 1925, the first batch of money was delivered. Now, it was time for phase 2. Normal counterfeiters usually use petty criminals to slowly introduce forged notes onto the streets. But the scale of this operation would have meant that this kind of layering would have taken them years to dump so much money. So initially, he hired people to deposit his counterfeit currency notes in their bank accounts and make withdrawals of real notes later for a small commission. While doing this, a bank teller got suspicious and sent one of the notes deposited for inspection. The results indicated that the notes passed every single security test. That is, because they were made by an official printer. And for the second and third batch of these notes, Reis bribed Venezuelan minister to Portugal, Simon Suarez, to use his diplomatic immunity to transport the consignments. The minister had no idea what he was transporting, and now it was time for phase 3. Reis had a grand plan in mind. He chartered a new bank for the sole purpose of circulating these notes officially to the public. This gave him the platform to dump his large load of notes at scale. And since the Bank of Portugal was privately held, Reis's endgame was to buy a controlling stake of the central bank in order to retroactively legitimize the forged orders placed to the printer from earlier by him, and in the process, legitimize the entire operation. The scheme pumped millions of dollars worth of fake notes, somewhere between 1 and 5% of Portugal's GDP, into the economy. This provided a liquidity injection to the economy as it was lent out to companies. And as a result, there was a noticeable jump in productivity in Angola, as well as in Portugal. While a lot of banks were failing at this time, only Reis's appeared to be succeeding. Reis was getting richer by the day. He bought several properties and businesses across Portugal and Angola using his newfound wealth. And the unique success of his new bank and his own rise to affluence attracted the attention of a Portuguese newspaper, who raised questions about how this particular new bank was flourishing when other incumbents failed. But they couldn't prove anything, because other than the source of their capital, all other aspects of their operations were in order. Manuel de Souza, a teller working for them, read the articles and was convinced that the notes were somehow fraudulent. He sent the notes to the Bank of Portugal with his suspicions, which led to a team to raid Reis's establishments, all of which had dealt with the notes. To their utter embarrassment, the notes were squeaky clean, and out of sheer desperation, they began to compare the serial numbers of the notes. And that's when they realized what was wrong. Slowly but surely, the entire plot unraveled. Reis caught wind of the investigation when he was on a ship on its way back to Portugal from Angola. One of his partners, Hennes, knew the game was over and escaped to Germany, but Reis stayed the course and was confident that he could somehow avoid blame and use the situation to his advantage and gain control of the Bank of Portugal. Instead, he was arrested and sentenced to 20 years of imprisonment. Hennes as well was eventually captured and he died in 1932, completely broke. Meringue got 11 months in prison, after which he moved to the south of France and started a legitimate business, dying in 1960 as a French national and a respected, wealthy businessman. The leader and mastermind served his term and died penniless in 1955. The Bank of Portugal sued the printer that helped them for negligence, and the central bank eventually won the case. But this was in no way a win for Portugal. The discovery of this fraud only worsened Portugal's tumultuous situation. Their exchange rate fell as the currency lost its credibility, leading to the government's credibility crumbling as well, and is stated to potentially be one of the major factors of another coup that brought a dictatorship to power less than 5 months after Rice was arrested. Rice wanted to play by his own rules his whole life, and it didn't matter who he had to screw over in the process to get what he wanted. It's rare that someone seeking riches could tank an entire currency and unintentionally lead to the dismantling of his own government, but for Rice, that's exactly what happened. Thank you for watching Learn Something New. If you like this video, please consider giving the video a like, because that can make or break the video in the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you want to see more videos like this one, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.